Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
RGE operates at the heart of the bioeconomy. Our renewable resources replace plastics. Alternative energy reduces carbon emissions. And eco-friendly materials are in products used by billions of people every day. We use waste and residue to produce sustainable aviation fuel because we believe that a greener future starts here.
Please welcome to the stage Meg Szabo, Senior Editor for Bloomberg Green and Sustainability Events.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, what a packed room. We're so pleased to be back hosting you here in Singapore again for our Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit. We have a great program ahead focused on innovative ideas and scalable solutions to help you meet your sustainability goals. But before we get started, a couple of quick announcements. First, I would like to acknowledge all of our summit advisors, Bangkok Bank, Fraser's Property, RGE, and Schneider Electric. And we would love to hear from you today. If you flip your badge over, you'll see a QR code where you can submit questions, you can see the agenda, you can also respond to some of our live polls that we'll have, and you can also find the Wi-Fi information on the back of the badge as well. And we would love for you to engage with us on social media today using the hashtag #SustainableBizSummit. And also, for those of you in the back, please feel free to take any open seat that you can find in the room, and we'll continue to bring in seats as needed as well. So with that, let's please get started with our first session of the day. We begin with a look at Asia's role in the global green economy.
Please welcome to the stage Marie Cheung, founding partner at Wavemaker Impact, Pek Kemkanist, CEO and founder of Impact Electron Siam, and Isao Sekiguchi, president of Nissan ASEAN, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Alan Tom Abraham.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and very nice to meet you all. We are here to talk about sustainable business and Asia's competitiveness in the green economy. I'm from Bloomberg NEF. Bloomberg NEF, for those of you who do not know us, is a research provider within Bloomberg, and we look at global commodity markets as well as technologies and business models that drive global decarbonization. So in order to just set the context for today's discussion, I have a couple of charts that I pulled together. On the first chart, if you could project that, yeah, thank you so much. On the first chart, this is in our annual exercise of accounting where investments into the green transition or energy transition is happening across the world. Every year we go about tracking where are new renewable energy projects getting built, where are EV sales being deployed, and also all the other technologies that is driving the energy transition. And what we've seen is that APAC as a region is historically one of the regions where we have seen majority of investments going historically. In fact, in 2022, we tracked record investments, about $1.1 trillion flowing into the energy transition, of which about 59% went into the APAC region. On the second chart I have, this is about within APAC, where did this investment go to? You can see renewable energy, which is the black bar here, accounting for a large share, over half, and then electrified transport within APAC becoming the second largest portion for all the investments that's flowing into energy transition in the APAC region. Together, these two sectors account for about 91%, which means that we have a lot more investments that needs to flow into all the other sectors that require decarbonization as well. So this is where we are today, and over the next 30 minutes, what we would like to discuss is where we are today, what does this mean in terms of changing geopolitics and dynamics, And how can Asia stay competitive over the next 20 or 30 years as we roll forward this transition? And with us, we have a very eminent set of panelists to talk to us about different aspects of this transition. And I would like to welcome all of them and thank them for their time today here. To kick off our discussion, I would like to first go to Peck, to you. Let's start with power. Renewable energy, as you can see, is one of those sectors where we've seen historically a lot of investments flowing in the APAC region. When you look at the status of deployment of renewables in APAC, how do you rate that in the region? And I also know that you're investing huge amounts and building large projects in Southeast Asia as a region. Very eager to hear your thoughts on the readiness of Southeast Asia as well to kick forward this transition.
Thank you. My name is Pek Kamkanis. I'm a founder and CEO of Impact Electron Siam, a humble small company in Thailand where we tackle a large project. It's been 12 years of working on that project, Monsoon 600 megawatt wind farm. We built in Laos, supplying to Vietnam under a long-term PPA, which is bankable. I think this is a very challenged project, but it set up a platform for more renewable, enable more renewable into the region. The project, it's make it possible, I think it's by our belief, firstly, and a team effort. It's led by the managing director, Kunat Utanawat, and I think we have a great PPA where we have, I would say, at a fair PPA, which provide Vietnam the cheapest renewable energy power into their portfolio. In addition, I think we have innovative financing led by our mandate lead arranger, who is here today, Jackie Sutani from ADB, and other 8 banks that participate in that lendings. Additionally, not only the wind farm that we own, but very strategically, we also own 500 kV double circuit that deliver power from Laos to Vietnam. And it is strategic because the wind is highly complementary to the hydro, which is Laos has abundant resources. When combining both, we can provide Vietnam with stable and dispatchable renewable energy, which is quite key. I think our ambition is not stopped there. I think we're looking at expanding additional 1 gigawatt on the adjacent site and to combine them with surrounding hydro to be able to deliver, fully utilize the transmission line of 2 gigawatts. So that's just been our next chapter, and I'm excited to.
Thank you. Same question again. How do you rate, when you look at Southeast Asia as a region, how do you rate the momentum here with respect to policies to support renewable energy deployment?
Well, I think we had a big support from government of Laos and Vietnam. And I think, as you're aware, also, there's a lot of other countries is having a policy to promote the renewables, such as Singapore, with the Singapore imports. That's one of the next target of us. I think we would like to work on, we participate in the Singapore imports together with EDF. We plan to build subsea cable, 1,200 kilometers, taking power from Laos to Singapore. It's a crazy idea, but when we start Monsoon 12 years ago, people think we're crazy. So you're always crazy until you did it. So.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yes, the policies are starting to come in. Big projects are starting to come in. Isao-san, to you, the question about transport. Electric vehicles and electrified transport, another big area of investments that's flowing into the energy transition. But historically, a large part of that has been driven by China and its huge scaling up of the electric vehicle industry. Please take us to how Nissan is driving the growth of electric vehicle adoption and manufacturing in APAC region.
Yeah, so it's one of the hot topics even within the industry these days. And as you mentioned, as you started off on how geopolitics are also impacting the entire automotive industry, not only the supply chain, but also from the policies aspects. We see US going to their own direction in terms of the policy. Europe is another, where you need to be selling EV to be compromising or leveraging the penalties that you need to pay. Now, where we stand in terms of emerging markets, especially Southeast Asia. So we know that some governments in this part of the world are pushing for EV for different kinds of reasons, whether you have the natural resource to commercialize it, or you want to continue to be the hub of the export in terms of transition to technology from the conventional gasoline engine to EVs. We see that Chinese OEM are aggressively and strategically in expanding their footprint to this part of the region in Southeast Asia. And from our point of view, the speed, to be honest, faster than we thought to begin with, because of the readiness of infrastructure is not there yet. Having said, just the statistic point of view, 60% of cars sold in Hong Kong last year were BEV. 15% of cars sold here in Singapore were BEV. And just last month, 10% of the total sales in Thailand were pure BEV, and all led by either Tesla or the Chinese OEM. So I think this is where not only Nissan, but many Japanese automotive companies, especially having a predominant presence in this Southeast Asia, are revisiting our entire strategy, and not only on EV, but on the supply chain as well. Because we've been here for decades making gasoline diesel cars, which are needed by each of the country. At the end of the day, still even today, the customers decide which car that you want to buy. But I think the trend is shifting. We see that visibility, and I believe your statistics shows that there are significant investment year on year coming on the electric transport. So how Nissan will compete in this very competitive environment, and understanding where we set a target of carbon neutrality towards 2050. So there are basically 4 pillars how we are going to go about it. So one is to continue to invest in the innovative batteries. This is meaning that we have started to work on making the all solid-state battery. We have already announced to commercialize it by 2028. So our team in Yokohama headquarters are working day and night. What does it mean? It will bring the efficiency and also the cost drastically down to today's conventional batteries. So that's one. Number two, having the BEV in place, still there are many countries are in the transition mode. We continue to invest in more eco-friendly engine, namely our technology is based on EV, but what we have is an e-power technology. It moves with 100% electric, but without a need of a charge. So we continue to invest in technology that will probably bridge between today's conventional gasoline diesel engine to BEV. Third, we have started actually producing and selling EV back in 2010. Since then, we've been working in creating the ecosystem around and going beyond the EV. So we have a recycling system, remanufacturing system, how we are going to reuse the battery after it has been taken out from the market. And fourth, we continue to invest in efficiency in the manufacturing. And one of the proof points is our collaboration in Thailand, where we have the solar panel from PEC's company that will help us to reduce the emission by more than 5,000 tons a year. So there are here and there work that has been done and in progress to be contributing to one of the regions that generates CO2 emission globally. So I think those are the perspectives that we see from a transportation point of view.
Thank you. Evolving geopolitics, US, Europe policies there. We'll get into more details of this. And also collaboration and setting up manufacturing, especially for batteries, and focusing on the technology. And technology is a good segue to come to you, Marie. We've talked about renewable power and transport, but there are lots of other sectors that also needs to go through decarbonization. And some of those technologies are still in very early stages, and that's where you come in. So please tell us a little bit about your investment portfolio or your companies or your projects in the region, and also what are some of the technologies that you're most excited or optimistic about?
Thanks, Alan, and thanks Bloomberg for having me. So I'm Marie. I'm one of the founding partners of Wavemaker Impact. We launched about 2 years ago with a mission to build a portfolio of climate tech companies that can abate 10% of the global carbon budget. And we do that by working with incredible entrepreneurs in the region to build what we call 100 by 100 companies. So companies with the ability to abate 100 megatons of carbon emissions equivalent and be $100 million revenue companies on an annual basis. So, when we launched Wavemaker Impact, we did a kind of back of the envelope calculation, and we realized that actually it's possible to abate about 50% of the global carbon budget just using the technology that we have today. The challenge, particularly in this region, is one of misaligned incentives. So the structures, the incentives are not there to really drive adoption. And that's what we thought, okay, that's something that the startup world knows how to do, right? How to create incentives, get users on board, drive adoption. And I think the second part of it is that, carbon is physical, distributed, and embedded. So, a lot of our energy infrastructure, your transport infrastructure is built around, these large centralized hubs of production. And when you look at it from a carbon lens, what you realize is that carbon is incredibly distributed. In the region, on average, households sit on about 9 to 10 tons of CO2 emissions on an annual basis. A rice farmer, for example, sits on half a hectare in our region. They cultivate a very small amount of land. So these are the challenges that exist in our region. So in terms of the sectors that we focus on the 5 biggest drivers of emissions in the region, which are land use change and agriculture. Together, that's about 50%. They're highly interlinked. The biggest cause of deforestation in the region is agriculture. We look at energy in the built environment, industrial processes, and transportation as well. So the types of technology that we're most excited about is technology that creates, increases revenue or decreases cost for customers and just happens to do it through green ways. So a great example of that is one of our portfolio companies, Agros, which is decarbonizing smallholder horticultural farmers in the region, starting with replacing diesel irrigation pumps with solar irrigation. And when Max, our founder, is going and selling solar irrigation pumps in the field, he's not talking about the impact of climate change or why solar is better than diesel. He's simply just saying that using solar irrigation can increase a farmer's revenue by up to 60% on an annual basis because they don't have to pay the variable cost of diesel. And because they don't have to pay the cost of diesel, they can fit in a third season. So it's this kind of low-cost, decentralized technology that isn't heavily reliant on R&D or science, but instead more kind of like an engineering challenge. How can I make a solar pump economical for a smallholder farmer here? How can I make a biochar pyrolysis machine workable on an SME basis? And it's creating incentives for customers around the region to adopt this technology because it makes good business sense rather than having to pay a green premium or having to invest in sustainability. So that's the type of innovation that we're super excited about.
Fantastic. I think, unless and until what we've seen is unless and until solutions are cheap, it's difficult to distribute it and scale it on a distributed basis. Shifting gears a little bit, geopolitics and the impact of the growing divergence in policies in different regions and what that means for Asia. If I can get like a 1-minute answer from all 3 of you about the impact of Inflation Reduction Act as well as other policies in Europe, like the CBAM or any other carbon-related policies or the Net Zero Industry Act that's coming up in markets like Europe, and the impact on investments that's flowing into Asia or APAC as a region. Do you think it's a positive thing or a negative thing for APAC as a region? Marie, let's start with you and go around.
Okay, I think I might have a, somewhat controversial view on this. I mean, first of all, I think a lot of governments in the region, particularly Singapore, which is our host country today, is doing a tremendous amount in terms of a policy environment and helping pave the way for more investment to flow into climate tech. That being said, I think this is not a challenge that we can rely on governments to solve for us. And particularly, in ASEAN, it's so many countries at different stages of development with different kind of objectives and outcomes that they're looking for. So I think this is really where the private sector has a role to play, and it has a role to play in coming up with new business models that are genuinely profitable and not reliant on feed-in tariffs or incentives from governments. And that's where I think we'll crack something that's truly sustainable.
Okay, so don't rely on policies and don't think about geopolitics. Okay, Pek, what about?
No, I share Maria's view. I feel like we met for 10 years, but I think we just met. But I think I share a lot of her view on, I think the private sector can help the policy to be implemented in optimal and sustainable ways. One of which is what we do with our project. It's never been done before. We start with the new policy. We start with a clean PPA, a white paper basically that allow providing the cheapest energy to Vietnam with international bankabilities. I think beyond that, on the micro level, we work with Nissan on total decarbonized solution. But the thing that we are pushing for is open access. I think to allow more sharing of the renewable energy and allow more access for renewable energy in all the ASEAN level. But I think it has to be more private-led because, as Maria said, quote unquote, government has many agendas. But I think we are hopeful, and I think we believe that it's coming along, especially in Singapore.
Maybe one thing to add is that climate tech, I think, was news this week, is now officially the largest sector of VC. So I think there is a tremendous amount of interest in from the private sector and funds flowing in to fund innovation in this space. So I think it's a good link.
Okay, so two of our panelists saying technology is going to reduce the impact of these sort of policy changes in the APAC region and how it's dependent on other policies in other regions. Isao-san, what do you think?
Well, I can only talk from the automotive industry point of view, but as Marie said, the speed of the development really differs from country to country, even within this region. And government, as Pek said, has many perspectives, many agenda. And definitely, automotive company cannot do alone. If you want to push for electric vehicle, for an example, infrastructure has to be there. Incentives need to be there to promote it. But one thing that we should not also forget is the speed of the transition and the transformation. As I mentioned earlier, that we've been developing the automotive industry, namely in Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, for many decades. And automotive company alone cannot make a car. We need 30,000 parts to build the 1 unit of a car. Now, if we push with this speed of the transition, electric vehicle normally requires 1/3 of that. So how do we make this industry sustainable so that not only the automotive companies are leading the way, but we need to make sure that our tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers are coming on the way on the transition. Otherwise, the automotive industry itself will not be sustainable. So this is something that we need to work with the respective departments in respective governments, making sure that there is a right speed for the transformation and the right solution and the right product for the customers in each respective country. I think this is something that we forget sometimes, that pushing too much from the product-led, but also we need to think from the customer side. And another thing that we tend to forget is how to make the supply side feasible. So more and more EV requires, let's say, fast chargers. More electricity is required. Are we there yet in this part of the world to generate and provide and supply enough electricity to the society that are required. I mean, we were just talking before the discussion. In Vietnam, I was there last week, they still have a planned blackout. Is country ready to push for such kind of electrified world where tons of supply of energy are required? I mean, how can we make together? So this is not about the automotive industry, but as a society as a whole, how can we make a sustainable society in this part of the world in a way that is suitable for our region to develop? And I think it requires partnerships, it requires support from the governments, and definitely companies like yourselves that are coming with the technology but needs funds to go with it. I think collective work needs to be done in making sure that we set a target that is in a sustainable manner. I think that's how I see that there is a necessity on the collaboration part in this part of the world especially.
So tailored solutions and partnerships critical for scaling up some of these solutions and making sure Asia continues its path towards the green economy. We have about 6 minutes left in the clock. Meg, I would like to pass this to you to see if there are any questions from the audience that are there for our panelists.
Yes, we have one question for everyone. What would you like to see as far as government action and regulations that could help to move the green economy forward?
Who would like to go first? Peg, let's start.
I don't really rely on government policy that much. I usually have an ideas and approach government. I think it's the other way around. But I think one thing, I'm not talking about the government, but I think one thing that we all should be recognized of is sustainable. Is not about just about renewable energy or technology. It's about sharing for me. I think how do we share the wealth in our region? How do we share a country where a lot of resources but lack of demand, where other country has a lot of demand but lack of resources? How do we do that? And importantly, on the community level, once you have present in such a local community, you need to be part of such community. And what we did with Monsoon is we commit beyond the royalty fee we pay to the government of Laos. We commit directly to the local that improve their life in health, education, and uplift their career. And that has been our value, core value, that we will be part of the community where we operate in. And I think in the other sense, like Sekiguchi said, so Maria, how do we implement technology to the micro level? In my view, I think to prepare for electricity or EV, you need to upgrade a lot of grid and the distributed level. Policy is open access or allow more access to renewable to come into the grid. Need technology, digital technology. I think we come across one technology that allowed dimming effect of whether it's EV charging or solar, which I think that's very small technology investment and policy going down to distributed level. I think I would like to see more of access to the renewable on the consumer level.
Very glad to hear that companies and entrepreneurs are thinking they want to go beyond policies and deploy solutions. It shows the maturity of technology and how comfortable you are with scaling those solutions. One of you who wants to take that question?
So let me take that one. So I go from my own experience that I have from day to day. So I live in Bangkok in a main street on Sukhumvit. I take my dog out for a walk every morning at 5. At 5 in the morning, less traffic, but still I see many cars coming out with the black smoke. And before we talk about going to the EV, I would like to see some policy where we can work with the government to replace some of those cars that are 20 years old, generating black smoke every morning on the main road of Bangkok, or it could be in Jakarta as well. So one of the incentives where government can consider before going to having nice EVs, because today who's buying EV? It's the rich, high income for second, third, fourth car, but not the first-time buyers. So one policy that we can consider is to have the scrap incentive, replacement incentive, so that we can start from today taking out those cars that are 30, 40 years old in the market, replacing with a cleaner energy car, including gasoline car, which produces much less CO2 emission. We can do from there, from a practical start point of view. But I think it requires a bit of awareness that we don't go jump into the future. There are many things that we can do from today. And as Marie said, using what technology that are available today. So we don't need to, start anything from scratch. There are technologies that we can provide. There are things that we can start from today.
Thank you. Meg, I see you have one more question.
Yeah, one last one for everyone. Can each panelist talk about one thing they are most excited to see in terms of creating the biggest climate impact in each of their areas of work?
Marie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm really excited about, we're working on an idea at the moment to accelerate financing for decentralized decarbonization assets. So the large projects, and maybe Pek can argue about this, but are well served, right? People know how to price risk, they know how to finance large scale projects, but there's much less infrastructure available for projects that are say between the $300K to $2 million mark, and I think that's very much needed around the region. So we'll hopefully be launching something at the end of the year that addresses that.
Sure, scaling up decentralized solutions.
Go ahead. Well, I would like to see a time where the electric vehicle become less expensive and be affordable to all the people in this part of the region. I think today the car is too expensive. Even the regular normal car is too expensive. How can we, I think one of the missions for automotive company, how can we make a car, cleaner car, that is accessible for all the people in this part of the region? So I would like to see that happen in coming years.
Do you have a timeline?
That's a challenge to say, right?
Okay. Pek, anything that you want to add here?
Sorry? What?
Anything that you want to add here?
No, I'm good where I am. I
Okay.
think what I do is exciting enough. So
Big projects, massive projects,
yeah.
send wind across borders. Okay,
So-
cool. Thanks so much,
Thank
dear
you.
panelists. Let's join our hands to welcome and thank our panelists
Thanks, Alan.
for the wonderful insights. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Grace Fu, Minister for Sustainability and the Environment of the Republic of Singapore, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Haslinda Amin.
Good morning. For Singapore, climate change is a matter of life and death. Not my words, but the words of the Prime Minister. A 4 or 5 meter increase in sea levels would mean that 30% of the country will be flooded. It's also about rising temperatures. I mean, Singapore experienced its hottest day in about 40 years just recently. So it's not surprising that climate has become a national priority. The government has pledged more than $70 billion over the next century to, I guess, guard against damages from climate. Let's get insights perspective from Minister Fu. Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Haslinda.
Is the rising sea levels an existential threat to Singapore? Might this little red dot, one of the richest in the world, risk disappearing from the face of the earth?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, we're talking about sea level rise that can actually inundate the country. We are also dealing with more intense rain. We have seen how we have, in July and August, which is supposedly drier months, we're getting rain when we're not expecting. Very intense, very short, but intensity that really can cause problem for us. And we are also looking at the knock-on effects of climate change. We're talking about warmer oceans affecting livestock in the sea. We're talking about changes in temperature and humidity in our forests, that could cause, or that could allow wildfires, forest fires to go uncontrolled. We have seen that in Canada as well. We're also looking at its impact on the water system, months with drier conditions. That has an impact on availability of water, has an impact on renewable energy, as we have seen in the case of France last year, where the lack of water or water that's too warm is affecting the generation of nuclear power. The water that they need to cool the plants, for example, wasn't there, wasn't enough. So water itself knocks on to other systems. And we're talking about the most important one really is food security. We have seen how variation in weather patterns are causing yield to be affected. India, for example, have just announced that they will have a ban on export of certain rice varieties. And why is that so? It's because they have some bad flooding in the recent months. They expect that to have an impact on the yield, and therefore prices is going to go, quite crazy. And therefore they said that for political price stability, they will have to keep the rice for themselves. And of course, for India, such a large rice producer, to do that, you can imagine that many countries around the world will have to deal with the downstream effects of a shortage in food, and that will be food inflation again. So this is now, when it's 1.1 degrees higher in temperature, what if it's going to go to 1.5, 1.8, or 2.3 if some prediction is showing us? So many of these effects is going to be self-reinforcing. We talked about how, for example, dryness in the rainforest is going to cause more fire, and fire will then create or destroy some of our carbon sinks, and that actually causes a vicious cycle. So to us, we take this very seriously across many fronts. We are going ahead with our coastal protection. We have about 135 million in terms of R&D that's set aside for coastal protection work. We've divided the country into 8 parts, starting with sort of detailed forecasting of impact of climate change on each of these sectors. We are calling for proposal. We have some engineering studies done to look at what that would entail, what kind of options, engineering solutions are available to us at the right time in a cost-effective way. We're starting public engagement with stakeholders in those areas to get them sensitized to this possibility, to get them to think about options, to think about new spaces that can be created as a result of this project. That's on coastal protection. We're looking at water security. We have looked at water security for 5 decades. So that's really putting us in a good position. We have desalination plants that have been set up. We have recycling of water that allows us to reuse water endlessly. We are now looking at food security as well. We have the plan to grow 30% of our nutritional needs by 2030, really having the capability to grow in a more climate resilient way, in a more resource resilient way. We invested in R&D to get that going. We put aside some funds to support the capital expenditure of our businesses. We are now working out with our businesses on getting the offtake. They are starting to produce. We are creating space for them to sell their products locally.
So you would say there is a sense of urgency to do something, yet there are skeptics among us. There are people who are still complacent, saying, you know what, you talk about an imminent threat, but that's going to happen in the year 2150, for instance. How do you urge businesses to take action today to protect us in the future?
Well, just look at what's happening around us. If you're looking at in Greece, they have to have warning to move to evacuate their tourists. And if you own a hotel property in one of these Greece islands, what's that going to do to your yield? Going to do with your business, your valuation of your hotel? You're going to ask yourself, is this going to be once in a 50-year event, or is this going to be recurring? Is South Europe going to be a good place for tourists in summer months. So that's really something that businesses should think about. But we are not leaving it just to the business leaders. We are working with, for example, central bankers around the world to start quantifying climatic risk. We need companies to think about the risk of climate on its business. We need bankers to think about the risk of climate to their portfolio. And we also need central bankers around the world to think about how is all that going to add up. If you have a serious flood incident, what's that to do to your portfolio? How's that going to impact your economy? How's that going to impact, the wider society? So all levels, businesses, bankers, central bankers, investors, pension fund investments will have to start thinking about this.
Is the private sector on board? Are they buying into this sense of urgency? Because there are reports out there suggesting that, yes, the government is clear on what it wants to achieve. Yes, the government has a plan, but the private sector is trailing behind.
Well, of course, like all things, there are companies that are really leading the charge, thinking about this and taking a very offensive position. They see this as a new business. They see that the world is, discovering or looking for new products, alternative energy. So they see this really as a new area of growth. But there are laggards as well. And the laggards will take some time to realize how it's going to impact their businesses. But we think that the momentum is coming. I've seen stronger momentum now this year compared to last. And a lot of it is driven through financial institutions, investors, and of course, from time to time, you will have events that push that back. The Ukraine war, for example, didn't help because you see that, old coal plants started to be turned on again, nuclear plants extended its stay. But I think the trajectory is quite clear, and I think there is a sort of willingness across sectors, particularly among the larger, more progressive companies, to see that movement.
Who are the laggards?
Many companies everywhere.
Which sectors in particular?
Well, many sectors. I think every sector will have its laggards. But as I mentioned, we need to work through the system. For example, our banks in Singapore. I believe that all three major banks, DBS, OCBC, UOB, have pledged 2050 net zero to decarbonize their bank book. They will have to then go sectorally to look at, how do they achieve that net zero targets. There will be sectors that is harder to abate because there's no available commercial technology right now. But having that sort of trajectory, if you know that you are here right now and you're going to go down to zero at that point, 2050, that sort of gives you the kind of time frame, the kind of gradient that you need to work at. And by investing time, resources, including financial resources in R&D, in looking for new projects, I think we're going to find solutions. The amount of investment that has gone in, for example, the US Inflation Reduction Act, for example, has really seen, the growth of, EVs on the car, the growth of investors, academia that's interested to find that solution, the new technology to carbon capture. By having a price tag, if I remember correctly, about $180 per ton for direct air capture. That number is focusing attention of many, many interested parties to look at solutions. Not everyone is going to be cutting edge, right? There will be this progressive one that's going ahead. But we're also seeing what others, even if you are not really looking for new technology, there are many ways to reduce your carbon footprint. For example, just reducing waste. Just reducing, assets that you don't need, or optimizing resource utilization. Have your trucks ply in a more optimized way, reducing number of trips, reducing time that they are going around on the roads. These are all ways that companies, can work very, very, I would say, low-hanging fruits that they can work very easily. As I think one of the speakers said earlier on, not everything needs to be new technology. There are many things that we can do right now to achieve, mitigation.
In terms of private sector participation, what role do you see them playing?
Oh, too many things. You know, when we're looking at, say, just take an example of the agri-tech, the food industry. We need investors that will come in, be really part of this new business that we are developing. We need technology providers that's going to, you know, work with us. We need people that's going to invest in infrastructure. We're going to develop, you know, a whole piece of agri-tech park in Lim Chu Kang. And in that process, there will be people that's helping us to do planning, design, infrastructure, laying our cables, laying our waste collection facilities, a whole range of possibilities. And more importantly, we are working with companies to offtake. We need the retailers, the supermarket, the caterers to start taking local produce. So there's so many ways that, you know, companies, private sectors can participate. And most of all, as I mentioned, we need financiers.
You talk about greening the Singapore economy, yet Singapore is a key hub for refining, petrochemical. It accounts, I think, about 5% of GDP. Is there a plan to pivot away from the industry, to pivot away from its reliance on oil?
Absolutely good question, because we get asked a lot, you know, about high per capita emission. We have a sizable petrochemical and refinery sector that employs, I think, 26,000 people in Singapore, good paying jobs, and it exports is probably number 8 in terms of refinery capacity. So it's not just for our own domestic consumption. The products are exported to many parts of the world. What do we do in a sector like this? We can take the one way we can say that, you know, we just don't want anything that's brown, that's fossil, and say, get out of Singapore. Where does it go? It has to go somewhere because we are still depending on these sectors to provide us with the chemicals that we need, the plastic that we need, all the PPE or the medical equipments that we are using plastic to make. We need them. So how do we then deal with a second option, which is really work with the industry to decarbonize, to make their products better, and to incentivize them to do so. So
where are you in that journey, in trying to get them to decarbonize?
So we have a carbon tax. We have already implemented it since 2019. We are first in Southeast Asia to do so. Right now it's at $5, 5 Sing dollars per ton. We have already said that it's going to go up to 25 next year. It's going to go up to 45 2 years later, and 50 to 80 by 2030. So that's a very strong signal. It's a signal to companies, large emitters, that to avoid paying the government tax, they should really look at reducing the emission. It's really to make the cost of emission very explicit, and therefore to tilt that level playing field in the favor of green technology. At the same time, we have also said that tax revenue that's collected from carbon tax will actually be put back to the industries, to the companies, to the SMEs, to, you know, sort of vulnerable households, to help them with the transition, because the transition has to be an inclusive one. So we are really working very closely with the companies that are working on Jurong Island, for example. They have a plan to make Jurong Island a sustainable chemical hub, working with one another, working with regulators, working with logistics players to decarbonize the process. We believe that we have to work with all stakeholders to make this transition.
Minister, you talked about waste. Singapore produces more waste than it can handle. In fact, the Semakau landfill is about to be full. What's the strategy there when that happens? How are you looking at it?
So first of all, we incinerate all our waste. If we're not recycling them, we incinerate them. So by incineration, we are recovering the energy, we are shrinking the volume. So volume that's you know, going down to 2 to 3% its original volume through incineration. And the remaining incineration ash, we put it on Semakau. And that's still filling up quite quickly, as you said. So now we are thinking about, can we recycle the incineration ash as well? We have new sand that can be used for pavements and construction purposes. We are exploring other uses for incineration ash. We are quite hopeful that within a few months, we think, we're going to have some decision on what to do with this incineration ash. And it's not just new ashes that's going to Semakau. We're thinking about mining the entire Semakau to recover the ashes for a second lease of life.
Rising tensions between the US and China. In fact, John Kerry was just in Beijing recently, achieved very little in terms of new commitment from China. Should we just forget about that net zero target? Is it impossible to get there with the two biggest emitters continuing with their tensions?
US and China are two biggest emitters, is two strong superpower, economic powers. We need them to be part of this discussion. We need them to be part of this movement. US has put in place, $370 billion IRA in Inflation Reduction Act. Many, many useful incentives. We see them already at work, already causing interest and movement on the ground. China has a net zero 2060 targets. Impressive plan of rolling out renewable energy, and they are doing that. So I think while there's geopolitical tension, two countries are doing their respective roles to get climate action going. But it's always useful for them to cooperate because we need all parties to come together at the multilateral level. The fact that John Kerry is meeting, the special negotiator Xie Zhenhua is a good sign. They are talking. They were not talking before. And we have seen in the past when major countries, big countries get together, when they are able to agree on direction, it gives climate negotiation a big push. And we hope that this will happen. It happened in G20 in Bali. It happened in G20 a year before. We hope that G20 this year will continue to see that momentum. Is it going to be easy? Not at all. We have seen, sort of past G20 meetings in India, still having problem over Russia-Ukraine, still having problem over a joint communique. But we are hopeful, and we have to keep working at it.
But hope it's not a strategy, Minister. Just one final question, because we're running out of time. As we head towards COP28, is it optimistic to even expect anything? And how would you define success at COP28?
I think with COP28, I'm hopeful that we're going to see progress on two fronts. First of all, on the negotiation front, I would like to see that we make, really to do a global stocktake. This is something that we have agreed in Paris. It's midway between Paris and 2030, and do a realistic and effective stocktake. In other words, what have we been doing? Where have we been going? Is that enough? If not, what else do we need to do? What can we do? I think there are some useful thoughts that are being thrown around. Can we look at implementation of renewable energy? Can we look at energy efficiency as some targets for us to work towards? I also like to see more discussion on adaptation, because I think that's the part that we have not paid sufficient attention. What should we do on water security for the world? What should we do on food security for the world, especially the most vulnerable countries? We need to pay some attention. We need to have a global discussion so that we can reduce and manage the poverty that we are seeing today. And it's going to get worse with climate change.
50-60% chance that it could be a successful meeting?
I hope so. I definitely hope so.
50-60%, that's very low.
I can't put a number to it because it's still ongoing. And the next 6 months is really going to be a lot of work, where a lot of work is done. But I will say that actually COP28, I'm also hopeful to see the non-negotiation track showing concrete results. Because these two has to work hand in hand. Political leaders, environmental ministers like myself, we take the cue from the businesses, we take the cue from our constituents. So when we see that there's actually call for greater policy clarity, for movements in their targets, then I think it gives us the confidence to go in for negotiation. And when we have clearer negotiation outcome, it helps businesses as well. So this itself is a virtuous cycle. It feeds on energy of each other. So we hope that the business sector, finance sector, oil and gas sector, for example, can give us that vibe, that energy, that signal that they want to move and they want clarity of policies from us.
Singapore Environment Minister Grace Fu, we thank you so much for your insights today. Thank you
very much.
Please welcome to the stage Matthew Tan, Legal and Compliance Director for Southeast Asia and Corporate Affairs Manager for Singapore at Pernod Ricard, and Sui Ling Chia, Executive Board Chair of Eco Spirits, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Ishika Mukherjee.
Thank you for joining us today. What we're talking about today is waste reduction and glass waste reduction in particular in the alcohol business. I don't know if that's good news or bad news for the Greek wedding planners, but that's what we're talking about today. And let me introduce you to the panelists. We have Matthew Tan, who is Legal and Compliance Director for Southeast Asia at Pernod Ricard, and Sui Ling Chia, who is the Executive Board Chair for Eco Spirits. So Sui Ling, let's begin with you. Why don't you tell us about what Eco Spirits does and introduce the product, the Eco Tote?
Sure, I'm not here to serve the drinks, just so you all know. Not yet. So essentially, I'd start with the numbers. So 70 billion glass bottles were manufactured last year for the wine and spirits industry alone. And these bottles, a lot of them, majority of them are single use. Some of them are recycled. Now, but the majority of them either end up in the landfill, where it takes thousands of years to degrade, or even if they're recycled, because glass is very expensive to produce, the heat that's required, the energy intensity, the fact that it's breakable is very costly and difficult to recycle. So it ends up being like less than even 20% that gets recycled, even in the developed world. So we came up with Eco Spirits, which essentially is, the mission is to end the use of single-use glass bottles. How? So for example, Absolute Vodka gets manufactured in Sweden. And in the past, it would be, or as it is now, it gets manufactured there, it gets bottled in these iconic bottles, and then it gets shipped across the world. Now, in collaboration with our very treasured partner, Pernod Ricard, who is the company behind Absolute Vodka, the vodka gets shipped in bulk we're present in 21 markets globally, and going up to 27 markets by the end of the year, proudly made in Singapore, founded in Singapore. So the vodka now gets shipped to Singapore. We have a containerized, semi-automated plant into us. So it gets shipped in 1,000-liter stainless steel vats. And so that saves significant amounts of shipping costs, and because glass is usually expensive to transport because of its weight, it now gets transported in bulk to our destination markets, and there it gets filled in these, what we call eco totes. And then from to us, we are now present in more than 400 bars and restaurants and hotels in Singapore alone. We distribute these eco totes with the vodka to these bars, where the consumer experience does not change. You still see this glass bottle at the bar, but when it's empty, it gets, the vodka gets dispensed from this tote at the back of the house. And then after this gets emptied, we take it back to the plant, where we clean it, we sanitize it, and refill it, and then that's why it's a circular. So we're essentially the world's first low-carbon circular distribution technology for the wine and spirits industry. I think I'll stop there for now.
Matthew, if you could talk to us about the pilot rollout in Singapore and what the impact really has been for Pernod Ricard in terms of waste reduction.
Yes, so I think we started the pilot a few months ago, and we started primarily with 3 of our products, Havana Club, Absolute, and Beef Eater Gin. So I think across the last few months, we've rolled out to about 31 bars with our products, and I think we've saved about 3,000 bottles so far. It's still small, right? But we definitely have plans to scale it up So the whole process of getting the technology validated, I think took about 18 months for us to ensure the product security as well as integrity, and to ensure that the whole process actually works. So this pilot is really a test to roll it out, but we are actually in the process of working with EcoSpirits on rolling out a global agreement that will roll our product, EcoSpirit and our products across the rest of the world.
Which countries are you targeting at this stage?
We don't have a specific countries yet. We're still negotiating on the global agreement, but we intend to roll out where all our products are across the world. Yeah.
So Swee Ling, this seems like a pretty commonsensical sort of solution, right, to reducing glass waste in the spirits business. What are the challenges of developing the product, scaling it? What were the challenges while you were doing that?
To be honest, I mean, because there is no distribution technology that's low carbon at the moment, we've had very strong interest. So we now see, we have two segments of customers. One is the likes of Pernod Ricard, the world's largest spirit companies that have committed to net zero. Because for each bottle that uses our solution, we save about ½ kilo of carbon. And actually this tote itself, you look at this tote, we actually can use up to 1,000 bottles for this particular tote. So and then for each cycle of tote, we plant a tree in Borneo, and we've planted about 35,000 trees so far. And so Pernod is one of our brands. We have about 150 brands in our stable at the moment. And there are a few more hundreds in the pipeline. So actually the scale is trying to be able to grow as fast as our customers want us to grow in the many markets that they're in. And a couple more numbers, you know, so because why do they like us? It's not really just because we are, obviously the green bit is the overriding factor, but at the end of the day, why is it an overriding factor? Is also because we save up to 60, depending on where the spirits are being manufactured, we save up to 90% in carbon emissions. We save 95% of glass and paper of waste. And so, and 30 grams of carbon per cocktail. So even, you know, we are in the Savoy Hotel in London, for example, and there is a low carbon menu, and the cocktail that has low carbon using EcoSpirits as the bottling technology is the best-selling cocktail in the history of the bar. And so we know that consumers are very willing to adopt the solution as well. But we just do B2B at the moment because that's where the biggest impact is. So, but going back to your question, it's really being able to grow as fast as our customers want us to go.
And I guess this question is to both of you. Can you really apply this model to every spirit out there, to every kind of alcohol, or is it limited to certain ones right now?
So for spirits, yes, because the inside of this, so it's tamper-proof. We actually have what we call a smart pour technology that is also Internet of Things using RFID. And so we can do track and trace. And the inside is actually glass, and so, you know, the spirits actually come in glass, right? So we can use, for example, for any kind of spirit. And we've actually been certified by the French organic wine authorities as well to do wine. And so for both wine and spirits, we can do.
So right now, what's Pernod Ricard doing in terms of the rollout?
We've actually just recently finished the pilot, so we are taking the studies of the pilot to sort of figure out how to further roll out this thing. And as I said, we have a global agreement to really review how we're going to roll in all the markets with the different milestones which we are still negotiating. But the idea is that we also intend to potentially increase the number of products. Currently, we are at 3 of our brands. We've got a few hundred brands, so, you know, we're going to increase the number of brands that we're going to be working with EcoSpirits on. And really, that is how we hope to scale this across the rest of the world as well, not just within Singapore. Singapore is just the initial test market, but we tend to roll it out for the rest of the world.
So we have both the bigger brands, as I mentioned, the likes of Pernod Ricard, and we also have a stable of smaller brands. And actually, for them, the cost savings and the waste savings are actually even higher because they don't have the economies of scale that's required to do all the bottling. So actually, we have a long tail of those brands as well.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we're now in Singapore, we're over 400 bars, but globally, we've got 2,000 bars and hotels. Likes of Four Seasons, Rosewood, they are big supporters. And I have to say, shout out to Pernod Ricard, who's also invested in the company, which is, and I would say Pernod Ricard is extremely open-minded with regards to the platform. The spirits companies, they compete fiercely, but Pernod Ricard is using our platform and has also, it's essentially the platform is agnostic. So we are open to Diageo and all the other big brands that are also competitors of Pernod Ricard. But for the good of the planet, they've been supportive of our rollout.
Yes, I believe to us, circularity is something that is not just confined to our company, but really something that we encourage as part of innovation as well as across the entire industry. So we are very happy for to work with eco-spirits, even with our competitors as well, because we believe that's how we really bring about change.
So why eco-spirits? Why did you decide to take a stake in the company?
I think, firstly, eco-spirits is one of those, it is a very unique company, right? So the idea of reusing and everything, it's not something that is particularly new. But I think for eco-spirits, they've demonstrated through our tests that they are able to ensure that our product integrity, security, and of course, how the bottles are being reused and everything. Because as some of you may be aware, there are counterfeit alcohol issues in some of the other countries. So this is really a significant risk for us if we were to work with other parties. In terms of scalability, I think eco-spirits has the ability to really scale it across the world. As I said, we're not just looking to do it in Singapore. So I think that's why when we looked at what they were offering, we could really work with them and to bring this to a much larger level.
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you do have numbers for us, what kind of emissions reduction are you seeing and cost reduction are you seeing now because of using eco-totes?
Well,
have you been able to quantify that?
We don't really have absolute numbers, but we are looking at about 50 to 60% at least reduction in the glass waste, depending on the number of users for the glass bottles.
And depending on the brand as well, right?
Depending on the brands as well, because I think some of our brands have stricter controls in terms of the number of users. So perhaps that would reduce some of the numbers. So but it would at least be about 50 to 60% reduction in all glass waste.
So when thinking about circularity in the alcohol business, what else can alcohol brands do or are they doing at this stage to reduce waste and bring in a more sustainable angle to their business?
Sorry, can you repeat it?
What more are alcohol brands considering right now in terms of sustainability, in terms of waste reduction?
Okay, so other than the reusable model, which is what eco-spirits is, we are actually exploring glass recycling. So I think in Singapore, we recently had a first glass recycling facility. So we are really, we started a pilot even with at a trade association level to explore how to do glass recycling in Singapore, right? And that is something that we are very excited about. We've not actually proceeded with that yet, we're still at the exploratory stage. But really, this is something that we hope to push glass waste in Singapore.
How successful has that been so far? Have you been able to, because the National Environment Agency, they came out with some numbers in 2022. I think only 6% of plastics were recycled in Singapore and just 14% of glass waste. So it's quite a difficult material to recycle as well. So yeah, how successful has that been?
Well, like I said, we're at the exploration stage, but because the news about the glass recycling facility just came early part of this year, so we've actually started the studies on how we can create a pilot around glass recycling. But definitely that is something that we are hoping to support the Singapore government as well, because the landfill situation in Singapore is fairly dire. I believe we will run out of space by 2035. So that's where we really hope to support, in our way, the glass waste in Singapore.
Okay, thank you. I think we can take some questions from the audience now. Meg, are there any questions?
You kind of answered this question, but I will. This way of recycling bottles in the spirit business is excellent. Do you see that it can be adopted by Coca-Cola and the likes?
I'm not in the Coca-Cola space. But I actually think, the thing about Coke is that at least the bottles are one kind, right? Whereas in the spirits industry, you've got Absolute Vodka that looks like this, and you've got different kinds of spirits that have different shapes and sizes. It's just harder to make it circular or recycle that way. But I think, I can't speak for Coke, actually, sorry.
And also, in general, they did ask, are there other industries that you can see that could benefit from the technology and infrastructure of eco-spirits?
So we are focused on a product that is quite premium, where we can actually make a difference, where there's premium and there's volume. I'd have to say, for other kinds of consumer, let's see, how well we scale in the next few years, and then see how it can be applied elsewhere.
How do you ensure the contamination risk when bars refill themselves into the glass bottle?
That's how, when we get vetted by the likes of Pernod, Ricard, these are the things that we look out for. And actually, so this, for the Absolute Vodka that uses our technology, we have an RFID that actually matches to the tote itself, and that it can only be dispensed, like an Absolute tote can only be dispensed into an Absolute bottle. So we try to, these are the kinds of measures that we've put into place to make sure to reduce the contamination, etc. Actually, the one thing I would have to say is that, for a lot of the brands where counterfeiting is an issue, where, an empty bottle of Chivas or Absolute is worth more than a full bottle in certain markets. Making it into an eco-tote actually makes it a lot harder for counterfeiting as well.
Last question. What is the expected number of green job opportunities that you believe will be created through this initiative?
I'd have to say not many. I mean, we are a B2B, very capital efficient business. And so, we are only a team of 30, but we are now in, 21 markets. So it's actually an extremely capital efficient business that's able to scale.
Thanks, Meg, for the questions. I have one last one. What do you price that at? How expensive is that?
Very cheap. There are now about 60,000 totes in circulation already.
Yeah.
So it depends on how many you buy. So you can buy it for $50. We're trying to actually make it, because as we scale even more, it's actually economies of scale, right?
Yeah.
We can try to reduce the prices as much as we can.
Okay, good answer. Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you for your insights, Sui Ling and Matthew. And it's time for a short break now. So everyone, please go outside, grab a drink. And we'll be back here at 11:10 to speak to SGX's CEO, Boon Chye. So please come back to hear that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please welcome to the stage Boon Chye, CEO of SGX Group, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Akshat Rathi.
Welcome, everybody. I hope you're well caffeinated. Thank you for joining us for this talk. Now, I'm a senior reporter for Bloomberg Green, and I am usually based in London, and it's been a pleasure to be in Singapore for the past week. I came to Singapore when I was 15 years old, 21 years ago, and the changes here have been spectacular, and I've learned a lot about what the island nation is trying to do on all things sustainability. The conversation we're about to have are the kinds of conversation I have on my podcast weekly. It's called Zero. If you're interested in climate solutions, please listen to Zero. But today we're going to try and focus our conversation on what Singapore Exchange is doing in this space. So let's just to start the conversation, give us an overview of, as somebody who runs an exchange, you are at the forefront of understanding what are the needs of investors and what are the trends that investors are following. So over the past few years, what is it that you have seen as a mega trend, and how have you tried to find solutions for it from an investor's perspective?
Good morning, and thank you, Joshua, and thank you to Bloomberg for having me here. As you mentioned, being an exchange, we are in a unique position at the forefront of the market ecosystem. We look at our roles in three ways. One is a company. How do we run our company? We've, over the last few years, started our net zero pathway. Secondly, the product and services that we offer, which is, I guess, your question around what investors and what trends are we seeing. And then third, I think importantly, at the forefront of the ecosystem, how we try and lead the ecosystem in terms of the sustainable journey. To come to your question in terms of trends and what investors need, I would characterize it as the following. There's obviously one where investors are only starting out new, but they want to get into the journey of net zero and sustainability. And there they would probably invest in funds that will allocate capital into climate resilient companies or low carbon emitting companies. Secondly, there will be those that will be confined to, let's say, aligning with regulations, let's say the Paris aligned regulations. And last but not least, there'll be companies that are really into it in terms of allocating capital and researching companies and helping them in that journey. So we've actually seen a trend where more and more companies and investors are down that journey. And we, as ourselves, obviously will be in there providing products and services like passive indices and benchmarks.
And so if you are new to this and you're just trying to get a feel for it, what is it that SGX is going to offer that would allow you to start to understand what is a complex environment?
I would look at it in 3 ways. One, allocate capital into ETFs, into the derivatives markets. We ourselves have launched with MSCI a climate action set of indices, which is really bottom-up, sector diversified, that really allocates capital in a rule-based, transparent way, and what most index would do, but really only allocating capital to companies that are on their pathways, transparent about it, and also have targets to achieve. That's one. And two, if you are a more sophisticated investor, they're allocating capital to factors. We provide what we call a climate impact consistent index that really tilt greater weights to the companies depending on their climate performance. We're not looking to optimize at the portfolio level. We're really allocating more weights to the company that are really on that net zero pathways. Third would be carbon credits. We ourselves have partnered up with Temasek, DBS, and Stanchart in Climate Impact X that offers carbon credits for companies that are beginning on that journey in terms of having carbon credits to compensate or neutralize emissions.
So let's split the conversation on 2 parts here. One on sort of indexes and ESG in general, and another on carbon credits and trading, but also net zero plans. And maybe let's start with carbon credits, because it's something that Bloomberg Green has covered widely. If you search for where the market is today, the issues it is facing, they're quite serious. So you launched CIX over the past year. There have been multiple auctions that have happened, and about 500,000 tons of credits have been auctioned on the market. Now, just for context, Singapore's annual emissions are 50 million tons and plus. So it's still a small fraction relative to what Singapore's emissions are. But the carbon credits and the use of carbon credits have come under huge criticism, because most of them, as we look deeper into the market, turn out to be junk. So what is it that you are doing to ensure that what gets sold, because there's demand for it, does not later on turn out to be junk?
Well, as with any market development and new markets, it's going to be a journey. There's going to be issues along the way. I think what is important for the carbon market is for any platform, CIX included, to provide robust information, transparency, and in the end, the market as of now lacks a benchmark price setting mechanism for carbon credits to clear. And like you rightfully said, there are different grades of carbon credit. And what CIX does are as follows. It has a marketplace that lists projects. It also has an auction platform, and also recently launched an exchange for spot trading. But I think key to that is for any credits or any projects to be listed, it has to be globally recognized. It should not have any negative taint or linkage to that. It must have sufficient verified unretired credits.
Right.
And last but not least, in that process, any platform, CX included, is to help companies and buyers of credit in that journey, no matter which spectrum you are at, with the information, education, and then helping them to make their own decision on purchasing any credits.
But when it comes to stock trading, for example, there are rules and regulations in place. You can't have insider trading. You do something that goes against those rules, you get into serious trouble. Now, the entire carbon offset market is based on voluntary rules and voluntary commitments that companies are making. Even these global standards that you're talking about are essentially industry, not-for-profit, sometimes academics coming together and creating those rules. Do you see that there is a need for regulation to ensure that there is not just credibility in the market, but that credibility is backed by laws that would then punish if people do abuse the market?
Well, I think that's the beauty of market evolution. If I give you an example of even at the Singapore Exchange, we are now the largest iron ore market globally outside of China. It started off 14 years ago purely as an over-the-counter market. No, so clearly bilateral, and then it gets cleared on the exchange at SGX. In the last couple of years, they have now been brought onto a rule-based, well-defined clearing mechanism on SGX, and today the total volumes are now 2 times the underlying. Exactly what you just said, you clearly need time for rules to be developed and evolve, and I think the carbon credit market is just part of that journey. And I think we're just seeing the early signs, the green shoots of what it is, and with any market, you're going to get some of the issues, but marketplace can come together.
Well, that's different because carbon credits themselves are at least 30 years old. The oldest carbon credit program was created in 1988. And so the journey has been going on for quite some time. So I'm not sure it's the same equivalence that you can draw because the market has been shown to have troubles again and again over the past 2 decades since it started.
Some market lasts for 10 decades, and I think the different markets have a different kind of evolution.
Right.
And for us as an operator of an exchange, in this partnership, that's what we like to bring to the forefront in terms of how markets should be structured, should be developed, and how players should come together, and how the rules should be designed.
Now, one other thing that's happened is obviously all the auctions that you've run have been oversubscribed. But globally, for the first time in 6-7 years, the number of carbon offsets sold declined in 2022 relative to 2021. And part of it is because of the credibility issue that the market is facing. We understand that traders who are working on CIX are struggling to find supply of good credits. Why is that the case?
Well, I think for high quality credits, they're clearly lesser in supply. But I think for any kind of credit, what is important is the transparency. And secondly, globally recognized, well-established projects. And then 3, I think more importantly, is the continuous monitoring of such projects. And I think that's key to that. And for example, CIX did an auction of the Delta Blue Carbon Project, the largest mangrove restoration project in southern Pakistan. Over the life of the project, it's going to sequester over 140 million tons of CO2. And that, when it was auctioned about 2 years ago, today is trading at almost 40% premium to the current spot price. So high quality carbon credits does have the demand that it deserves.
And just for context, I mean, it's 140 million tons is a huge project. So as looking at Singapore's emissions, Singapore's cumulative emissions as its lifetime over the past, since its independence, are 2 billion tons. So, you're making one project that can make a substantial contribution if it actually works. Now, going to ESG, I live in London, as I said. When I look at ESG, it's sort of a different flavor, but depending on which region you're looking at. There's a whole political backlash in Europe, in America around ESG, which is getting mixed with Democrats versus Republicans. In Europe, the government, and especially the European Union, is coming out with real big strict rules, but sometimes those rules are either too complex or too strict, and then there's backlash from industry that there is lack of clarity. When you look at ESG in Asia, what is the flavor of ESG over here?
It's very widely defined, frankly, as you said, and it really depends on the sector and the stage of the economic development of each country. And even if we take the E part of ESG and link that back to environment/climate, let's also not forget in many of these projects that we just talked about, some of those, the corresponding benefits are the social co-benefits into the community. And that's part of the aspect. And I think critically in this part of the world, and we'll talk about energy transition, I think just transition is important. No one should be left behind. I think it should be inclusive. And I think that's a journey for sectors and companies, and including governments and regulators to all come together to play their role.
So you are seeing there being demand for ESG-oriented investing, and that's the reason you've created the products, or you want to be ahead of the market and you're creating the products because you expect an ESG market to happen. Where are we right now?
We're seeing a good take-up rate as more capital are allocated towards climate transition. As portfolios get bigger, investors will require similar tools at their disposal. So at SGX, we want to be at the forefront. It's never easy to try and predict demand and a trend, but I think climate risk is real, is here and now, and I think it's important that we will play our part in whichever role we are, which company, which sector, and we think investors would require more tools at their disposal. And we at an exchange works with the ecosystem to try and provide the relevant products and services.
Now, there is one way in which you can move capital, which is through indexes where people make choices that weight them towards environmentally friendly companies. But there's another one which you can use, which is exclusion. So you can exclude a certain amount of, say, coal financing, which many banks have done, or you can exclude oil and gas in the Arctic. There are these exclusionary principles that many banks have adopted. Are there any exclusionary principles that you have adopted or are considering adopting when it comes to running the exchange itself?
Exclusion typically happens at a portfolio optimization level. And I don't think that really plays a useful role in any company that is undergoing a net zero transition. You can't turn from a brown company to a less brown or a new company tomorrow. I think what is important is in that journey, capital is being made available for company who wants to go on that transition, who are very clear on what are they emitting today, what forward targets do they want to set, but more importantly, a very near-term intermediate step to demonstrate that they're really on their pathways and continuously achieving, disclosing, and being very transparent with that. And I think one of the ways to look at that, as I said earlier, whether that is the MSCI climate action indices that we do, that really rewards company on that journey, continuously monitor you, or if you're more sophisticated in the climate index, considered index that we have, that really allocate more capital, the better you are as a company in your climate performance.
The trouble is when you look at what's happening in the world right now, heat waves in Europe, floods in China, it's very hard for people to see that climate impacts are growing. Emissions haven't actually declined. We had a record emissions globally last year. And so even as companies are making plans and there are targets to try and keep them on track, observe if they're doing what they say they will do, surely there's a point where there's not enough progress. Somebody has to draw a line and say, okay, we've given you enough time, we've monitored your progress, you're not making enough progress. What's the punishment? What happens when that moment is reached for a large company that's either trading on the exchange or as part of an index?
I think financial markets can play an important role, and I'm very glad being part of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, part of the Principals Group. We're going to launch a new work stream globally that SGX will be part of that to mobilize capital towards companies that are really making that effort. And I think for investors, the pressure of climate change is real. I think we can all play our part to try and allocate capital to help companies in their pathways.
And when you look at Singapore specifically, what are the types of conversations that, given all the products that already exist, but the rapidly changing environment in which ESG operates? What are the kinds of products that are on the horizon that investors want, or what are the kinds of needs that they come to you with that make you think, okay, I need to work on this?
What we're really seeing in terms of demand and pickup rate is really in the barbell part of the investing. Passive investing via indices, but very clear and transparent around only capital being allocated, increasingly only the companies that are performing better in their climate journey. And then the other one is really allocating capital directly to companies. And then what we're also seeing in between is carbon credits. And I think carbon credits are here to stay, notwithstanding some of the challenges that we see. And carbon credits doesn't need to be a consequential action that companies or anyone take. It is not after a broad footprinting, knowing your emissions, then you look at carbon credits. It could be in tandem, it could be in parallel, because you can use that for compensation, for neutralization of emissions.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for taking all the questions, and thank you all for listening. And if you enjoyed this conversation, I hope you'll tune into Zero Bloomberg Green's podcast that comes out every week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Manish Pant, Executive Vice President of International Operations at Schneider Electric. Pernod Sirivadana, Group CEO of Fraser's Property Limited. Chartsiri Sopang Panit, President of Bangkok Bank. And Anderson Tanoto, Managing Director of RGE, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Mark Whaling.
Good morning. How many of you believe that society is moving at a sufficient pace on the climate crisis and on the ESG agenda? Raise of hands. Sufficient. I see a few hands. For the virtual audience, maybe 2% of the room has raised their hands. How many of you believe that your business is moving at a sufficient pace on the climate crisis and the ESG agenda? We've gone down to 0.0%. Well, so the four leaders to my left represent businesses that are accelerating this agenda, and they're going to have a chance to elaborate a little bit more than I let you all. Now, I think what's important is that they are representing solutions that are scaling the effort against climate change and also other aspects of ESG. And so in the next 28 minutes, we're going to talk to these essential players and understand how are they accelerating the agenda through the lenses of technology and collaboration. Kuntoni, let's start with the money. Now, net zero requires significant, massive technology deployment we've never seen before. That requires finance. How do we accelerate capital flows?
Yes, this is a very important issue. That's why the target also need to be set on both a medium-term and longer-term basis for the carbon neutrality as well as the net zero. The capital expenditure need to be planned well, especially with new investment that will be taking place and how to adopt the sustainability and the green concept into this part. Yes, we work with many customers to help them make the transformation and the transition to these major requirements. For instance, we work with many customers on the renewable energy projects, whether wind or solar across the region, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in China, for instance, or even in Japan. And also we work with many of the companies that are making the transition to reduce the carbon emission and also reduce different types of carbon dioxide, for example, in the installation of the solar panel for their manufacturing facilities for energy saving. So these are challenges that we are providing and working with our customers accordingly.
And could you tell us, when did the shift toward renewables begin for the bank? You've been doing it for quite some time. And today, maybe what portion of the energy portfolio do renewables take up?
I think the first part starts with the government side. I think some over 10, 15 years ago, the government started with the consideration of the diversification of the energy sources, which I think previously mostly on the fossil base. We have some hydro power, but mostly in the coal, lignite, or the fossil base. So over the last 10, 15 years, government have been systematically on the renewable energy with the solar energy, then later on with the wind. And initially with significant support, financial support, tax support in order to make the project moving forward. But as time goes on, the expertise move forward, and together with the production cost that has come down quite significantly and become quite comparable to other sources, actually in some sense also somewhat cheaper in many sense nowadays. So we work with those customers along that basis, both in terms of the commercial loans and later on also access to the capital market through the green bond, sustainable bond, and also sustainability-linked bonds, which also have certain targets for the corporates to achieve. Yes.
And I haven't looked on Bloomberg just this moment, but I know in the past you have been a leader of the market share for green bonds. Does that stand very true in Thailand today?
Yeah, I think about 70% of the bond issuance on the green bond and the sustainable bonds, we have always been a lead underwriter in that process.
Mm-hmm. Manish, we heard Kuntoni speak a little bit about renewable energy. There's a whole lot to the energy system, supply side, demand side. And Schneider Electric brings a whole lot of different technology solutions to market, critical for decarbonizing. Could you tell us what you are particularly most excited about?
Sure, and thank you. Great to be here. We'll follow the money. I would say, yes, at Schneider Electric, we are the digital partner for sustainability and efficiency. Today, 80% of the problem of carbon is linked to energy. And what we say that 70% of this problem can be resolved today. I think this has been the theme of this morning, that we need to move fast, and there are solutions which have been existing today. The equation is simple, or if I oversimplify it, it is electrification plus digitization is equal to sustainability. And why? Because electrification is the best vector of decarbonization, because it can be renewable, it could be stored, you could work with microgrids, it could be decentralized, it could be coming close. And then you have digital, which is the best vector for efficiency. And I say that because digital is making energy visible. So today you have connectivity from plant to plug across the full flow of energy that was not possible. Now, thanks to COVID, we've had, we have seen the acceleration of digitization. We have episode 1 of internet, which is about connecting people to people. Now, we have to go faster on the episode 2, which is connecting machines to machines and machines to people. And together with this, we are able to drive much more sustainability. Now, if I go to the next step, this 70% of the solution exists from technologies today. And we say that because there you can look at the demand side as well as the supply side. On the demand side, which is more pressing and something that we can address today, and thanks to financing which is available, first is about energy efficiency. We need to drive much more energy efficiency, which can solve, according to our studies, almost 25% of the problem. Then it is electrification. I mean, we heard from Nissan this morning, electric vehicles are more efficient, and electrical energy is much more efficient than any other form of energy. You can feed in an electric vehicle directly to the wheels of the car the energy, so you're not wasting. In very simplistic terms, the same about process electrification. So electrification can resolve almost 30% of the problem. Electricity is, today as it's roughly, and I think I quote Bloomberg here, around 20% of the primary energy is electrical. That is going to almost triple in the coming 3 decades. So electrification is the other solution that we have. And finally, we have the supply side, which is other 45%, which is, again, decentralized. You need to make sure that you're ready for that bidirectional flow of energy through microgrids, through storage, through electric vehicles feeding back into the grid, et cetera. And this is what is going to solve today those issues. And 2030 is around the corner, where we are committed to reducing by 50%. And if we don't meet 2030, I think 2050 is far away. So this combination of electrical and digital, and I think there's no energy transition possible without the digital transition, and the two go together.
Pernod, it was farmland, and then it was a radio station, and now it's the most expensive mixed-use development in all of Thailand. Tell us about One Bangkok, and why should we be excited about it after this video, and I'm sure it links to a few of the things that Manish has talked about.
Thank you, and thank you, Mark. Thank you, Bloomberg. I think the important part of what we do is to think a lot about sustainability. And at Fraser's Property, we know real estate make a big impact to carbon emissions. We contribute to 40% of globally of carbon emissions in the real estate sector. And if you talk about city development, we account for 70% of the carbon emission. So sustainability and carbon neutral objective is very important to our strategy. The knowledge that we built over since the first initiative of sustainability and green development started in 2006. We have evolved, and it takes time because real estate cannot be changed overnight. And as mentioned of many of the discussion today, we talk about if this is going to work, it's because of collaboration, because of like-minded approach. And together, the most important part is technology as well. Definitely, the partnership with Schindler is definitely the journey as well to us. So at One Bangkok, it's a collective experience and knowledge as well that we did across different parts of the world. And many of initiatives, even brownfield, also start to happening because of what Minister Fu mentioned on the collaboration and the effort of Singapore government together with Sing Power, Temasek. We work together to create a new green energy node as well, like our retail center in Tampines. We work together to create a more adaptive EV solutions, to create the thinking on joining with multiple developers to create district cooling on a brownfield projects. So those are the change we want to continue to make. And many of those things drawn to an ambitious scale of One Bangkok, where it's built out of close to 20 million square feet on a single development planning that allow us to create one of the largest district cooling first by private sector, and working together with a strong experience of Gulf Energy, Tokyo Gas, and Mitsui. So we're able to provide the thinking on what the future real estate look like and how it could be future-proof. But that's only a beginning of the stage where from that, then the design, the collaboration with technology partners, with user, with even the better insight that we work with Accenture to create a new thinking on customer journey. We work with Hitachi on creating the new smart cities thinking, how with the single connected development of office, hotel, retail, residential, we can see in the trends of the city development, mixed use will become the model that components need to be more connective. And that will build first thing on energy efficiency. It will build into a better circular economy. We're working on the entire supply chain as well, how we work from the build form. It's a great example at One Bangkok where we're able to work with SCG, which is one of the largest cement company in Thailand, to recycle the top concrete pile that fully recycle because of the scale of the waste concrete just on the single build form, able to build 30,000 prefabricated panel, 30,000 square meter prefabricated panel structure. So we are able to prove the circular economy can be efficient, can reduce waste, and can build better efficiency to real estate as well. So to scale of One Bangkok, we're coming live next year, and it will be an exciting stage to us looking from build form to operational form. And the important part is understanding to build the more sustainable customer journey and build efficiency together. We're creating a full life cycle of sustainable and energy efficiency and looking at part of the journey to renewable energy as well. The group has been focusing on renewable energy, especially on solar. So we have now already installed about 25 megawatts of solar system onto our real estate, and by next year we'll complete to 35,000 megawatts of solar power.
And Manish had talked about digital. What are some of the exciting digital aspects of what you are doing there?
Schindler have been a good part in building up this heart of the operating system. We operate the entire complex through data centers, through district cooling. So Schindler has been part of the main electrical equipment onto the facility as well. It's proved to give us the best insight and the knowledge in improving and developing the right efficiency to feed the right energy into the life of One Bangkok, into 20 million square feet of operating real estate.
Thank you, Kunpapot, for giving us this opportunity. And we are, the platform that you're using, which is EcoStructure, is something which can, there is one side is the CapEx and the other side is the OpEx. And I think that when we are talking about sustainability, we have to look across the full cycle. And I think that here is a visionary and forward-looking company that is already thinking around it, and I'm sure that Bangkok Bank is also looking at financing in terms of how we can look at the TOTEX, the CapEx plus OpEx across the full cycle.
This kind of entailing the decade of effort of us that the policy maker and the financing part like Bangkok Bank as well has seen in us, and we have been working in the focus to drive the outcome of our sustainability initiative. And today we already done over 10 billion of green sustainability linked loans and bond. And Bangkok Bank has been a great partner in the journey of all those initiatives with us as well. And thanks for the support.
If I may say some words on his project, because I was shown the project at the point of the conceptualization. I think because the chairman has a long vision, but then put a very young leader in charge of the project. So he brought in many technology, and at that time also the expertise of Fraser Singapore also put in quite significantly. So I could see at that time I was explained about how so not only commercial complex, which normally we would see from a developer, but he also spent a lot of emphasis on sustainability in different components and use different technology. So to your point about acceleration, sometimes a leader can also help change that direction with the same investment, but then put in different emphasis. And I think we'll probably see the final product soon of how this will come out.
Thank you, Kap. Chasri, Kap. On the part of that objective, I would want to mention on how we become the first LEED neighborhood certification in platinum level as well. What we do here is the aim to support our partners, our customer as well, where they are now, if they are part of One Bangkok, they already get more than half of the certification point to make themselves a fully sustainable retail, sustainable real estate space as they plan as well. So our investment and future investment of what we think it's relevant to how we will be able to build and connect sustainable partners to the future as well.
As Kun Tony said, I think a lot of these complex systems solutions today require the wisdom of age, but also that young understanding of technology, and really it's that mix of talents that need to be on these projects. Well, everyone is excited, the businesses and the residents, I'm sure, to move in next year. And now, if we shift gears to Anderson, you have such an extremely diversified set of businesses, and that ranges from pulp and paper to palm oil to energy to real estate. What are the levers of decarbonization that you look at, and how do you prioritize them?
Mark, again, thank you. Kun Tony, Pernod, Manish. What's fascinating just now is you say the two levers is electrification and digitalization. But you got to bring that value chain just one step above, because if that electricity that you're using is coming from fossil-based energy generation, it's pointless. You can be EV, but you're using electricity that's actually generated from coal. So I think if you take one step back, energy generation, basically sustainability needs to be done as a whole supply chain, upstream all the way to consumers. And I think that's the exciting part, and the biggest challenge for us is how do we connect the supply chain? For us, we're more on the upstream side. That's from energy generation, which is from the gas business, but also from biofuels. For me, the exciting part about the transition right now is that going green actually makes business sense. A perfect example, solar panels. We've also decarbonized a lot of our operations from fossil-based energy to solar panel-based energy. In 2019, when I first installed my first megawatt of solar panels, the payback, as I shared a few years ago, was about 12, 13 years. Right now, with fossil fuel prices high, going to solar, the payback is less than 6 years. So right now, going green is not about only going green, it's great for business. That's the first. Second, if you want to decarbonize our business, I look at it from two value chains. One is feedstock. Are we sourcing sustainably? Are we sourcing the right materials? Second is, how are we fueling or energizing our process industries? And that is, for us, in our case, where about 90% of our energy sources from biomass, but the last 10% is still from fossil-based, whether it's gas or coal. That's how we're trying to decarbonize it, by going through solar and some level of digitization. Digitization allows us to gain more efficiency. But fundamentally, if we're still having energy sources from unsustainable sources, it's not going to solve the fundamental problem.
And we heard a little bit earlier about electrification, and you mentioned that in the beginning. I think it was the UN Secretary General, when the most recent report came out, talked about the need to electrify everything, everywhere, all at once, a phrase that we all know quite well at this point. Now, you mentioned fuels. In a net zero world, what is the role of fuels looking beyond electrification?
I think electrification definitely makes sense for a number of things. I give a good example. We have an LNG facility that we're building right now in Western Canada, in British Columbia. Compressors are effectively large fridges that cools gas from ambient temperature to minus 160 Celsius. The compressor that we have, instead of going gas drive, which is very natural because the gas is right there, we're going with electric drive. So that allows us our emissions to be reduced 9-fold. So our average emissions is 11% of a regular LNG facility. And then the remainder 11%, we're deciding to offset it with nature-based solutions, forestry projects over there. So that's a good example how electrification can reduce emissions. But it still doesn't 100%, to me, eliminate emissions. And hence, there's still a lot of opportunities for the conversations offsetting in the right format. That's the first. Second, electrification doesn't always work, at least for the next 10, 20 years. Aviation is a good example because of its weight and power to weight ratio. So I think there'll be still maybe another 5, 10, 15, 20 years where you see planes flying on electric batteries because of its weight. So that's when biofuels come in. I think there's a lot of discussion about sustainable aviation fuel. Not only, I think Europe just launched a mandate, 2% of SAF blending starting 2025 and 1% increase every single year up until 2030. Singapore is looking at that as well, and many other countries is looking at that. So biofuels have a role to play because it's actually readily available. Of course, the big challenge of biofuels is food versus fuel, right? I mean, are we using corn, edible oils to actually go into fueling machines? And in an inflationary environment like this now, it's very, very sensitive. So we have to move towards next generation feedstock or second generation feedstock of biofuels, which is recycled oil, which is agricultural waste. Again, bringing the circular economy concept to make sure that we're decoupling food versus fuel conversation. So what I like about biofuels is readily available, the technology is there, and you can immediately implement and decarbonize existing machines. Even though, yes, they're internal combustion engines or turbine engines, but you're immediately solving this problem in the next 10 years. So that's the exciting part about biofuels. Readily available feedstock, readily available machines. To convince the airlines, Boeings and Airbus, to switch to electricity in the next 10 years, that's going to be a stretch.
I don't think we'll be on that airplane, but at some point, we'll be on one of those. We'll see. Now, if we go back to you, Kuntoni, we talked about capital, and naturally that is collaboration. You're providing capital into your customers and into the market. What are some of the other ways that you're influencing or supporting your customers?
Yes, you have asked us earlier about how Thailand started with the renewable energy and certain incentive provided in order to get the business moving. Energy is the largest carbon emission. I think next is the logistics. And in Thailand, I think they also try to convert and have the adoption of the electric vehicle, the EV. So the next year, promoting the adoption of the use that purpose. And I think the important part is in order to get the volume up so that the manufacturers can do the assembly in Thailand, as well as to build other related part components in order to make the business possible. So yes, on one hand, to go for sustainability, economics is also an important factor, and certain incentive also is needed in order to keep, in order to make it possible, and also then we'll be able to survive in the medium to longer term. Actually, on Anderson's point on the biofuel, for example, in Thailand, the usage of the agricultural products to fuel related also help farmers to be able to stabilize the price of the food, of their products, which is also good for them for the long-term purpose, and also so that the subject less to the volatility of the agricultural, because industrial products sometimes prices are more stable.
It's such an important point in terms of the S of ESG and really the inclusive nature that we need to have in this energy transition is farmers and other groups that may not be part of that technical solution, but actually can play a role, things like feedstocks and the way this can be circular, as Anderson and Pernod talked about as well. Manish, you were saying some really fascinating things separately earlier about how you influence your suppliers, and tell us about that collaboration and how do you bring the whole ecosystem along?
Sustainability is about achieving together, and it's something that we have to embark the whole ecosystem. And for us, we have to also think upstream, I think, taking Anderson's point. And this is about how we are able to work with our suppliers. So if we are committed to net zero by 2050, we need to make sure that our suppliers as well are embarking on that journey. So we have launched what we call as a zero carbon project, where we have taken our top 1,000 suppliers. Actually, a quarter of them are here in this region. And we want to get them on a path of reducing 50% of their carbon intensity by 2025. So it's a much more ambitious program because it's taking the top 1,000. So we have created a playbook for decarbonization for them. We are using what we use for our customers, for our suppliers, just as we use it for ourselves in our facilities, and get them on this path, helping them get into renewables, and to see how they can be on this journey. Today, pleased to see that we are almost at about 18% in terms of the journey, and we started this program in 2021. So, we are on the right path. We've also extended this program working with some of our customers. So we have Energize program, which is with the pharma industry, where we are helping their suppliers get on this. Gigaton is with Walmart, the same project for the Walmart. And recently we did a Catalyze program with Intel and Applied Materials to see how we are able to take it into the semiconductor industry. So this achieved together, that working together is something which is very, very important. And we are pleased that we can share what we are doing ourselves with our suppliers.
Thank you. And Khun Pernod, you mentioned collaboration earlier, and you've all talked about that ecosystem. But in terms of One Bangkok and really any of your projects, how do you identify the right partners who are with you in that agenda you have on sustainability, even when it may mean greater costs and you need to bring them along, you need to influence them?
The beginning definitely have to be the vision first, because of, everybody can provide technology, provide expertise, but do they have the like-minded, the alignment, right, to sustainability? And it is the portion of what we see that it's not a short journey, it's a continuous journey. In our part, Frasers set out, as one of the first real estate listing in Singapore Stock Exchange to set our carbon neutral objective by 2050, and we set our science-based target. The view of that is it built into 3 stages. We built to get ourselves ready to that target, but the stage of making sure we work with all our partners, all our tenants, all our customers, to making sure we all help to meet that target together is the most crucial part. So we start to want to making sure we engage deeper in the vision and the outcome beyond the business as well. And once that's done right, it's actually what Anderson mentioned, it's become even more viable because we are looking at the new efficiency. We are looking at the more sustainable outcome of our business. And end up all this part as we look at this of seeing in a broader base of what impact us as the world, as our society, our communities, that become the objective of the projects that we are doing. It has to drive it people-centric. It has to drive it the smart thinking on smart cities, on smart real estate. But the third part is then, if we do that right, then the sustainability should be there. And sustainability beyond green is also the knowledge of the process to get there.
Right. And Anderson, similar question. When we think about the alignment you have to do upstream and downstream with your partners, even when economics may not suggest it, regulation may not require it, how do you work with those partners to drive and really accelerate your agenda?
Mark, thank you for the question. It's fascinating. I always believe this saying, it's an old African saying, to go fast, you go alone. To go far, you have to go together, right? Unfortunately, in this climate problem that we have to go fast and you have to go far. So honestly, you take chances. We form collaborations with our upstream supply chain, working very closely with our sourcing team with the farms to get them on RSPO certification. Some fail, some do not fail, but the reality is not doing anything is not the solution. So there are certain work streams, for example, like electrification of the LNG facility. We're working with Siemens and BC Hydro, which is the hydropower plant that supplies us electricity. So there's alignment of interest and collaboration come in. But there's certain collaborations that are actually almost misaligning of the interest, where, for example, we're pushing our truck suppliers to go towards electrification because we can provide cheap electricity at site, but there is still a resistance because internal combustion engine is still the dominant way of producing vehicles for trucks, especially for industrial use in certain supply chains. So really, what we see right now is actually the companies with no burden. Some of the Chinese truck companies are a bit more aggressive because they don't have the legacy supply chain of internal combustion engines. So my perspective on collaboration to push the sustainability conversation, because one of the topics here is leading with urgency, is form collaborations, multiple collaborations. Some things you have to take risk, and you really see after a year or two, you'll see whether the collaborations work or not and move forward, because not doing anything is definitely not the solution. So.
I'd like to close the question. You know, you all are leaders of very distinct businesses, and you've talked about collaboration and technology. But for all of us in the room, as you look at the long horizons, what are we not talking about enough? What should be part of the conversation that you think is under our noses and we should be talking about more?
Well, I would say that let's do more of what is available today. Negawatt is the best watt. So energy not consumed is the one that we don't need to produce. I think let's do more of that. Let's do more efficiency.
Other thoughts? As we look at the long horizon, what should we be paying attention to? Other than GPT, we're all paying attention to that.
I think awareness is quite an important part. And so how can we get the people and the society to understand more what is capable of doing, and also how to help the people make that transition. I think that is a very important part, which also means changes in the way that they do business and their daily life, and how to make that transition possible to lead to greater and faster adoption.
I view being in what Anderson mentioned. I do like of us be able to make sure we're willing to take a bit of risk for the greater good, and you know, moving ourselves together with the right speed. It's definitely a good context that you have built. Sorry to take away your answer.
I'll keep mine very short, Mark. I think the reality is, as we transition, there are risks, but there are trade-offs. We just have to take some of these trade-offs. I mean, energy, for example, we talk about the energy trilemma. We would like low emissions energy, we would like secure energy, and we want low-cost energy. There are trade-offs, but we have to make decisions and move forward. Because if we are in the limbo, we want low-cost energy, we want low emissions energy, we want it secure, there's no perfect world out there. So we just have to make decisions, move forward, and certain trade-offs, we just have to bite the bullet and make decisions. So.
These are not the laggards that Minister Fu talked about earlier. Let's all accelerate. Let's all thank our summit advisors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Yuan.
Hey, Fozzie. So nice to see you, finally. Lotus and the gem together.
I really agree.
High five, Fozzie. We want to create that togetherness into the painting itself. We poured our two hearts into a canvas. Now you're part of the family.
Please welcome to the stage Elena Fanjul Debnam, founder and CEO of Labor Solutions, and Laura McGill, Global Head of Sustainability Global Supply Chain at Bata Group. for a conversation with Bloomberg's Meg Sabo.
We are here obviously to talk about building an ethical supply chain and labor in particular. So we just wanted to start, I think, picking up on what the last session was just talking about. And I'd love to ask you both, why do you think it is that we don't talk about the S in ESG quite as much as the E?
Yeah, thanks, Meg. What I find is it really has to do with the fact that we don't have the right language and that we're scared of talking about the S in ESG. So when we talk about the S in ESG and I read reports from investors, from other people, we see such a wide range of things that people are trying to do. Like they might be endowing a professorship or they might be feeding, hungry children food. But the fact of the matter is our first responsibility as companies our first social responsibility is to the people in our value chain, upstream and downstream. And we need to focus on that. There's no such thing as net zero when it comes to the S in social sustainability. You can't have forced labor in your supply chain and then offset it with a professorship at Stanford, right? That doesn't work. We actually have to take on these issues. And so I think boards and CEOs need language to talk about how complex this issue is and to break it into pieces and decide where in their value chain, whether it's in the upstream, so their supply chain, where Laura works, or it's in their downstream in marketing or delivery or even disposal, that they need to spend their energy figuring out what to do about people.
Yeah, 100% agree with you, Elena. Bata, it's really about how we define the S. And is it our workers? Is it the community? Is it the school teachers that work in our community, and really looking at it that level? Also further defining the workers, is it the blue collar worker that is in our in-house manufacturing units, or is it the office worker, or is it somebody working more in a global role? And really, what are their needs and what are their drivers, and how they are giving back to the company as well as to the community in which we are operating in. Before we really sit down and address the E, we really need to look at who is the S and how we are defining the S. And BATA as a global organization, I know many people think BATA is more local, but we are in 71 different countries with 21 of our own in-house manufacturing units around the world. And how we define the S within our organization does vary by region and even by our operating countries where we're operating, because we have to look at the needs that are relevant for that area where we're operating. So how we work with a worker in our manufacturing facility in one region or one country may vary, because there could be a shortage of water in that area, or in another area there could be not enough water. So we really have to evaluate the impact that we're having on the worker and then how they extend that out into the community.
So I'm going to kick us off next with our first live poll of the day. Just a reminder to respond to our live polls. You can just scan the QR code on the back of your badge to put your response there. So the first question is, what is your company's primary motivator for addressing human rights issues in your supply chain? So the responses for that are, is it financial companies and investors, or is it more driven by the new regulations that are coming from all of the different countries? So I'll start with you. What would you both say your response is?
Well, I think this is really exciting time to be in this space, because finally regulators are catching up, and so are financial institutions. So I've been working in human rights for over a decade now, and this is the first year where I'm advising PE firms, where I am advising real financial institutions who have power over how do we talk about human rights? How do we make sure that we're not only doing value protection, but we're also doing value maximizing? So how do we go beyond just making sure there's not forced labor, but making sure that we're doing good things? And part of that is coming from the fact that there are these incredibly big laws that are coming out around the world. We kind of divide them into 4 different types. So the ones that have been around for a long time are disclosure laws, simply saying that you just have to say you don't have forced labor in your supply chain. The second one is what we see happening in the US, where Customs and Border Control is saying if you have any product that is made by a Uyghur or that might have Uyghur slave labor within its supply chain, then we won't let it in our borders. This model is a guilty until proven innocent model. So what we see happening is that containers are being stopped at the border pretty randomly and seizing products, right? Until the company can prove that there was no forced labor, and not just forced labor, but specifically Uyghur forced labor in the manufacturing of that product. And so let me tell you, this is getting boards' attentions, right? When you have millions and millions of dollars of product held up at a port, you can't sell it, you can't do anything with it, they're paying attention. The second thing that we see happening is coming out of Europe, where we see these new human rights due diligence laws that are basically saying you are responsible as a company to any harm done to humans or the environment within your supply chain in the making of your product. These laws are insanely mammoth, right? They're very, very big. They're far-reaching. They have lots of different requirements. And so this is a more innocent until proven guilty model, but we're going to have to see over time what happens with case law, and so how people are going to react to it. And so right now, from my perspective, I see most European companies really seized by trying to figure out what these laws mean to them and how they're going to act. And then the final kind of set of laws that we see are the greenwashing laws. So these are laws that are basically saying you can't market and tell people that you're doing education if you're not actually. And so we're seeing this really change the way that people speak about the social sustainability that they have within their supply chain. And the Dutch are kind of really pushing that one home right now. So you might be seeing a lot of headlines around that. So the point is that boardrooms are finally paying attention, right? So I think regulations are pushing it, but financial and investors are kind of reacting to that regulation, right? Because it's now value protection, right? I can't invest in you if you have forced labor in your supply chain because you're not going to be able to get your product out. You're not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. But
absolutely, you definitely. One of the big things of primary motivator is it's what the government is putting out there and what's there, the compliance side of it. But really, what we're trying to do is it's not just about the compliance. It used to be about I want to move beyond compliance and demonstrate continuous improvement within my global supply chain. Now it's moving beyond continuous improvement to demonstrate due diligence. So what you have to be compliant to the regulators. Now financial companies and investors want companies, public and private, to start to raise the bar and practice that due diligence, and what mechanisms do they have in place for those due diligence. And that for many companies is a big ask. And we have to face into that this is coming. And really moving forward, the boards are asking for it, and ultimately the consumers are assuming that that's already happening. It's amazing how many consumers are not, they assume that it's already there, that level of due diligence, and it's still coming. We have to link the financials in with the sustainability agenda. This has been something that has been being addressed for the better part of 10 to 15 years. We don't need sustainability as a standalone. It needs to be incorporated into every activity that an organization, a company is doing.
So let's see what you all think. If we could see our poll results from the poll. I can see them before you guys. But yeah, so it looks like most of you believe financial companies and investors are really driving the change. I am curious if after hearing the answers, if you feel like regulation, maybe, I feel like regulation is a big one, but to your point, I feel like I should have had a both response on here because they're kind of working together.
Well, you know, like I said, I've been doing some advisory work for PE firms, and I've been reading all of these sustainability reports, right? And when we look at the E, you know, there is such an incredible narrative that we see happening across all portfolios, right? And many companies. Everybody's talking about carbon emissions, and it's really clear, and every famous CEO you know out there has some E project, right? So everybody's excited about it. And I think we just don't yet have the words to talk about the S in a way that can get boards excited about it. And that's why the regulation part is so important, because now it's like, this is the baseline, this is what we expect. You know, we're not gonna have CEOs walking out and being like, woohoo, we finally don't have forced labor in our supply chain, right? Like A, probably not something they can ever actually say with full confidence, but B, definitely not something they want to admit that they haven't been doing. To Laura's point, this is something we all expect already happens. So I think it's a combination, and it's making sure that we really have good narratives and making sure that we know where is our biggest impact, right? And for tech companies, that's probably going to be in your downstream and how it's used, right? How is your product used? Is that causing harm? For apparel and footwear and electronics companies, that's really going to be around who's making your product. Where did your product come from? What materials were used in getting that product, right? We know cobalt is a huge issue, right? A huge risk point. And so these regulations are now saying it doesn't matter if you don't know. You have to do something about it. You have to be responsible for your actions. So I think this is an exciting time to be in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the value chain is when you look down the downstream at the manufacturing side. At Bata, we're also a manufacturer, but we're also a brand retailer. We have our own stores around the world. And it's also how we're looking at the value stream upstream. You know, it's how we're working with our logistics partners. How do we get that product from a manufacturing facility to port, from port of landing to the retail stores, right? All of that S in the middle as well is definitely important, and that impact of that S on the environment is equally important. We have to keep this in mind that the person that is driving the truck, you know, are they using an engine or an electrical vehicle, as we heard in the last session? You know, we also have, they're the one who either can make that decision and make that impact, whether they're a freelancer or a part of a company, and they can impact that. So it's not only just downstream, but it's also upstream in our value stream.
Yeah, I think it's, the question we're asking is everyone in your value chain treated with fairness and respect?
Yeah.
And that starts at home, right? You can't look at your suppliers and say, you need to treat your employees better if you aren't looking inwardly first, right? And you aren't, so it's in the same way that we're using the examples in carbon or in the environmental side to say, look what we're doing, we have to do the same thing when it comes to employment, right? When it comes to who are our workers, how are we treating them? What is fairness? What is respect? Do they have overtime, right? Yeah. Are they paid fairly? Are they paid competitively? You know, what are the things that we're thinking about to make sure we're not causing harms to humans?
So that leads me kind of to, obviously, the regulations and the financial impact of where the change is starting to come from. Data is the important piece, collecting the data and starting to have measurable data. And I know that, as you mentioned, just because we don't have the same kind of metrics to measure in the E side, it can be a little bit more difficult. Laura, why don't we start with you? I know, where are you really on this data collection journey in response to the regulations and the financial impact?
Yeah. So Bata, we're a 100-year-old plus company. We have loads of data. Where we are in the journey is how do we take the data points and link them in together and make that data readable and usable. I think many of us in our roles at many companies, reading data and understanding data is a completely new skill set that possibly didn't exist 20, 15 years ago as it does today. So we're very much at taking the data that we have and how do we use that? How do we read that? How do we take that to make an impact? How do we use that financial data? How do we use our labor statistics and our labor data very much around how we're working in the voices of our workers, whether they're coming at different stages of our own values change or our supplier value change. We're measuring things related to labor standards, working conditions. We're looking at things like energy, water, and waste. Wastewater as well is in there. We're measuring our chemical use. We're measuring, and when we review those as well, we're trying to identify where we can improve, where we can maybe take something out and substitute it to make a practice or a tangible, like for example, a chemical or a material, substitute it with something that will have a better impact for the environment and measure that. And we really tend to not go from 0 to 100 overnight. I think many companies prefer to start small and grow, and that's really the approach that we're taking, that we start small, we learn from that experience, and then we look to bring that out globally for a bigger impact.
And for you, where, you obviously are working with clients and companies to help them figure out how to start their data journey. What's kind of the first steps that you take with a company?
Yeah, so again, I think first it starts with thinking about what data you want to collect and how is that important. And I think the scale that we're talking about is so big, right? We're talking about, in some, you look at Pepsi supply chain, right? Pepsi has, I think, they impact something like 800,000 people, right? Like, so how are we breaking this data down in tangible pieces that we can make change and actually know where the problems are? And so what we do with companies is we first talk about our own responsibility and then empowering our suppliers throughout the supply chain to take responsibility for their employees as well. And what we want to make sure that is happening is that there are systems. So we're not out there looking and making sure and seeing if there are issues. So for example, my assumption is that there's sexual harassment happening in almost every company in the world, right? The problem isn't the sexual harassment. The problem is, do we have the system to catch it, to remediate it, and to make change based on, when we find out that it happens, right? Do workers have voices to do that? And so what we do is we help companies first break it down, and then second, work with workers to listen to workers to understand what problems they're facing, and if they feel like their company is responsive to those problems. So I think one of the biggest numbers that we use throughout everything we do is an eNPS, an Employee Net Promoter Score. Would you recommend this as a place of work to a friend or family member? So to me, that's a really comparable number. It's great. It works in like so many different kinds of contexts that we can use that number to tell our workers being treated with fairness, right? Yes, they may have a complaint, but do they trust and believe that that complaint is going to be addressed? That's what we care about. And so we help companies, big consumer brands, go to their suppliers, make sure that their suppliers have all of the correct human resources tools to ensure that their workers are able to do these things. And then we collect eNPS, make sure all workers have been educated about their rights and responsibilities. We make sure workers have access to grievance mechanisms. We ask questions like, do you feel safe at work? These are really great questions to help us understand what the worker experience is and if there are risks that maybe we don't see. Because a lot of these things that are happening that are bad are kind of not necessarily out in the open, right? They may be happening behind closed doors, or they may not be, like an audit isn't gonna find some of these issues. Audits look for things that happened in the past, right? They aren't very good at predictive things. So we're helping companies by collecting data, speaking with workers directly, and then making sure that we segment that data based on suppliers and where it falls within your supply chain so that we know where the risks are and we know how to help them and improve it long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100%, listening to the workers. And when you mentioned, Elena, around, audits are looking at what's happening. It's a bit reactive. And, we want to be a lot more predictive in that. And how do we become a bit more proactive? And workers who are doing those jobs every single day, they do have a vision and a direction of what they're working on and how they want to see it go forward.
First line of defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether it be related to grievance mechanisms and on how to improve a grievance mechanism, or different ideas on how to bring camaraderie around the workforce, or to unify people around even worker safety. But some of the best initiatives, and also to tie the S to the E, is some of the best initiatives within Bata are coming from our workers in our own supply chain. And what we have a couple of years ago, we had a production engineer say, hey, I want to do solar. I'm responsible for all the electricity in this facility, and I want to do solar. And guess what? That project today is very successful, and that solar power we now feed back into the grid. And it's also about forced labor. It's also about listening to the worker. When you listen to your worker, you also can tie things into other areas, such as the E.
Yeah, and that's a fact, right? We've seen, I don't need to sit here and tell you this, right? I'm sure you guys know higher eNPSs have bigger returns on your bottom line, right? We know that when we listen to workers that they're more productive, they're less likely to be absent, they're more likely to deal with their health issues, they're more likely to be collaborative, right? So yes, the first place is dignity of work, right? Protection of rights. But then once we do that, we can go to engagement, right? We can go to value add. How do we leverage our workers to make our companies even better than what we imagined, right? How do we use our workers as part of our systems of innovation?
Absolutely.
And that ultimately is, think about it for, I'm sure many people in this room, work is where you spend most of your time, right? And so you want to be happy there. You want to feel like if you're not being treated with respect and kindness or engagement, man, not a great, life to live. It's a horrible existence. And so I think paying attention to that is really important to solving this problem and to increasing your bottom line ultimately.
I'm going to work in a couple of, since we're getting to the end of our session already, man, too fast. I wanted to just ask a couple of audience questions, and then I have one last question for myself. Do you make your ESG data public and available for your investors?
This is a great question, and ironically, I just had this conversation last week. So this is something we are gathering. We do make the data available. So at Bata, we are not publicly listed on multiple stock exchange. We are publicly listed on a few of the Asian stock exchange, where we do at this stage provide that stock exchange and those investors that data. We are working internally, as I mentioned earlier, to synthesize that and to bring things forward. And that's really, I've been at Bata for just over a year now, and that's been a big part of the last 12, almost 13 months of my job, is to understand what's there, and then now let's use it, and let's start to communicate it, and let's start to use it for predicting and driving things forward for an impact.
So a question playing devil's advocate here. They say, at the end of the day, the higher cost of any sustainability initiatives, are they passed down to the consumers? What do you think?
Yes and no. I mean, that's why it's really important that we have regulations involved, right? Regulations level the playing field. If nobody can have forced labor in their supply chain, then all prices are rising, right? It's the same competitive market. So I think that's definitely part of it. But again, as we said, like almost all of the work that we do around human rights, we can also show that it increases your bottom line. Yes, at the end of the day, probably if you don't pay people to work, then it probably is cheaper for you long term. But is that the right thing to do, right? Is that the only thing that you can do? And we see that when we do start to pay people and we do start to engage them, that there are other benefits that happen to our company.
Any thoughts to add on that one?
No, not really. I definitely align with Elena. Where you're definitely going to see everything is going to be in the bottom line. Of course, you have to make some investment up front before you start to see that in the bottom line, and you need to start to streamline your employees and start to collect that data and read it and understand what it means. So absolutely agree.
Great. So my last question to you both is going back to the regulation and the data piece all combined. Mm-hmm. There are so many different regulations that ask for so many different things. For these companies in this audience, what do you recommend that they start, and where can they start on their journey to try to address all of these new challenges coming from the regulatory market?
Yeah, I think number one, first and foremost, almost all of these laws are actually based on the UN guiding principles for business and human rights. So get educated, right? They're all based on the same core principles. And so, I think first and foremost is educating yourself, your team, and your suppliers. And that's a really easy, low bar to do, right? The second thing is to, at the very minimum, set up a grievance mechanism for workers within your entire supply chain, right? They have to have a way to talk to you. Now, I can talk for ages about what doesn't work about grievance mechanisms, but it is a baseline. You have to do it. Yeah. It's a non-negotiable. So I think those are the two places to get started. And then I think start thinking about how your human resources and what you know as a human resources company or what your human resources team is doing, how can that help your suppliers, right? What can you do? And then finally, I think you're gonna have to focus, right? You have to focus. Your supply chain is so big, upstream and downstream and everything. So where do you have the most impact? Where is your biggest impact? And that's really where you should put the most energy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just to add to that, one of the other things too is you have to have partnerships, external partnerships, multi-stakeholder partnerships, whether it be with bilateral organizations, NGOs, local community organizations. These are very important, especially when when you're working with your workers and they're raising something that they either want to do or a grievance, how you react to that. It's not about knowing everything 100% internally yourself within your organization, but really through those partnerships and those organizations that have a Charter House rules type of approach really can help you bring everything together and also help you to understand where you are in your journey and how you are comparing to other people, because some competition can also be healthy.
Yeah, you can't do it alone. And there's experts that have been working on this for a really long time and have learned a lot about it. So ask for help.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, Elena, Laura, thank you so much. I feel that I've always thought that S is a very hard to measure area, but I feel like there's data that's starting to come towards it,
Absolutely.
so it makes it a lot better to understand, so thank you. This wraps our morning block of programming. It is now time for lunch. You can join us and grab lunch right outside. And then at 1:15, back in this room, we will be doing our facilitated networking. So you will be able to connect on some of the topics that we'll have 3 different topics with 3 different Bloomberg moderators that are available.
The word sustainability seems to be on everyone's lips. Climate change, water and energy crises, economic and social upheaval. It's overwhelming.
Back on? Okay. So the 3 topics and speakers that were on the screen behind me we'll kind of have some signs around that you can find. So I'll be back on stage at 1:15 to just direct you for how we'll be operating those facilitated networking sessions. But first, just enjoy some lunch, and we will be back here at 2 p.m. for our main stage programming with the CEO of Banpu. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.